it is ultimately how we answer those questions within our worldview that guides what we do with our life, how we live our life. What do you believe is true about the world? How would you answer the question, where did everything come from? Or how do you answer what is morally right or morally wrong? Does life have any meaning, or is that question simply absurd? Is there life after death, or is death the end of all things? Today, I want to talk about how we come to see the world in the way that we do. So in this video, what I really want to get to and discuss is how is it that our worldviews are formed? Where do our worldviews come from? I want to start with a quote from philosopher Patrick Hurley. In his book, A Concise Introduction to Logic, he quotes this. He says, "Beginning in infancy, our worldview emerges quietly and unconsciously from enveloping influences, things like culture, language, gender, religion, politics, and social economic status. As we grow older, it continues to develop through the shaping forces of education and experience." And so what Dr. Hurley is talking about here is that our worldviews are shaped primarily from the influences that we have in our lives. And it's from these influences that we begin to interpret reality, and we build for ourselves this theory of everything, or a philosophy of everything, a philosophy of reality, what we believe is real and true about the world. Now, as human beings and as a Christian, I believe that everyone is made in God's image, and therefore we all have a philosophy. Now, a philosophy is not necessarily one that's learned from a textbook. There's a component to that, as Dr. Hurley mentioned. Philosophies are influenced through our education, but our philosophy is an overall view of life that attempts to make sense of the world. And this fact that all of us, whether we believe Christianity is true or not, or whether we have consciously formed one or not, or sat down and examined our worldviews, the fact that each one of us has a worldview and a way of interpreting the world and what is real points to the type of beings that we are. It points to the type of creatures that we are. And as human beings, we are sense-making creatures. We seek to make sense of the world. We want to understand the things that are around us. And if we can't make sense of things, it creates almost this angst inside of us, this uneasiness inside of us. And we see this because we're the only creatures on this planet that ask questions like, why is something the way that it is? Why are things the way they are? And then a follow-up question to that is we may ask, ought the things be like that? In other words, should they be the way they are, or should they be a different way? We also ask questions like, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be alive? Now, I know that I'm going to step on some feelings here whenever I use this example, but to kind of put this in context, understand I am a dog lover, but my dog Trooper doesn't sit around and ponder to himself, I wonder what it means to be a dog, right? He doesn't reflect on what the essential properties of what makes him a dog versus what makes the neighborhood cat a cat. And he doesn't engage some imaginational faculty where he begins to ponder some world in which he was a bird instead of a dog and what it would be like to fly freely. No, I mean, I would imagine that the only thing my dog Trooper thinks about when it comes to birds is whether or not they're tasty or not. But he doesn't sit around and ponder some of these deeper philosophical questions like we do as human beings. And bringing this back to mankind, it points to how our worldviews are formed and what sits at the root of these worldviews, and when we've formed that worldview, what that tells us a bit about ourselves. And so worldviews, when we shape them, and as they are formed, as we are maturing and growing up, they ultimately come from this deepest longing as sense-making creatures to have an explanation of the world, to have this ultimate explanation of what is real in this story that we find ourselves in. Now, what's common across these worldviews as we try to make sense of the world is some of these different yearnings or longings inside of us, these deeper questions that are inside of us. And I got this list from Dr. Paul Gould, and it's from some of his research into life's meaning. And he points to six different existential longings that we have. These are existential are longings that we experience as human beings. One of them is this longing for purpose. We want to know what our life is for. What is the purpose to it? Am I sent here for a particular reason? And do I exist for a particular reason? That would be, what is the meaning in life? In other words, what am I supposed to do with my life? But we also have questions like, what is the meaning of life? In other words, is there a meaning to all of this that we experience and that we see? We also long for value. We want to know that that our lives are valuable in a sense that living is good for us, and that our specific life, us living our life, is good for others. We want to be a productive part of society. We want to live for the good and betterment of the world as a general rule. We also want our lives to be significant. We want to know that our lives matter. When we are gone from this world, we want to know that we've put some sort of fingerprint on this world for good. We don't want the world to just go on as if we've never existed. We hear this language when we hear people talk about leaving a legacy. They want their lives to be significant. But we also long for intelligibility. We want our lives to make sense. In other words, we want our lives to be lived in a way that corresponds to how we believe. We want it to make sense. We wouldn't live our life in a way that our belief was that we should live for good or live for doing good, but then live our life intentionally doing bad. That would give us this life that was unintelligible. It wouldn't make sense because we didn't live our life in accordance with what we believed. We also seek this identity. We want to not only know ourselves and who we are, but we want to be known by others, and that comes through a sense of identity. We desire that relationship with someone else as for them to know us and to know who we are. And then finally, in this existential set, we long for a transcendence, something that is greater than ourself. A longing for something that transcends or goes beyond us. Many find the satisfaction for this transcendence in God. Others find this satisfaction in seeking what Dr. Clay Jones talks about in immortality projects, things that leave a legacy so that we have lived a life that is bigger than ourselves, and we find that transcendence inside of that legacy. Now, I'm not going to go in and critique any particular view, one or the other, but it's important to understand that how we answer these questions, how we make sense of the world, has a direct correlation as to how we live our lives. Because while on one side of it we are sense-making creatures, the other side of it is that we are doing creatures. In other words, we take what makes sense, how we have answered these questions, and then we live it out in what we do. That's why we have sayings like actions speak louder than words, because we have this innate understanding that what someone truly believes, what someone truly believes is important and ultimate, is how they will align and live their lives. For an example, someone who believes that pleasure is the ultimate source of meaning to life will have a life that is lived primarily aimed at increasing pleasure to oneself. It's really that simple. The decisions and actions that person takes will ultimately be done for what they perceive as pleasurable. Another person may view that success is an ultimate source of meaning, and their lives are going to be filled with things like accomplishments. You'll know these people because they're going to have goals. They'll have their 5-year goals, their 2-year goals, their plans and steps to achieve those goals. And as they achieve those goals, they will then rapidly move on to the planning phase of the next goals and achievements that they're going to go and tackle and accomplish. Again, I'm not critiquing any of these views as to where the ultimate meaning of life and satisfaction of life are in. I just want to draw an understanding of it's how we answer those deep existential questions of meaning and purpose, values, significance, identity. It's how we answer those questions and what we fundamentally believe about the world through understanding things like our culture, how we were educated, how we were brought up, how we interpret that data, answer those questions that will ultimately drive how we live our lives. And so it's with this understanding of this information that we draw our worldviews. And those worldviews, they could be absolutely proper and true and correspond to reality, or we could have answered those questions and have a worldview that's absolutely false. We could be wrong in our understanding of what brings ultimate value and meaning and intelligibility to life. And so it's important for us to sit back and first understand how these worldviews are formed and what is at the root of how we see the world, because it is ultimately how we answer those questions within our worldview that guides what we do with our life, how we live our life, and how we go about interacting with others in our life.